Garton would later tell officers Hughes and Conley that he was pretty sure Mellon was high on something. So he was, Haggerty would agree, when this idea was passed on to him by officers Gardner and Reeves. He was high on 2 fried doughboys smeared with honey, on the carnival, on the whole day. He had been consequently unable to recognize the real menace which Webby Garton represented. "But that was Adrian," Don said, using a tissue to wipe his eyes and smearing the spangled eyeshadow he was wearing. "He didn't have much in the way of protective coloration. He was one of those fools who think things really are going to turn out all right." He might have been badly hurt there and then if Garton hadn't felt something tap his elbow. It was a nightstick. He turned his head to see Officer Frank Machin, another member of Derry's finest. "Never mind, little buddy," Machin told Garton. "Mind your business and leave those little gay boyos alone. Have some fun." "Did you hear what he called me?" Garton asked hotly. He was now joined by Unwin and Dubé. The two of them, smelling trouble, tried to urge Garton on up the midway, but Garton shrugged them away, would have turned on them with his fists if they had persisted. His masculinity had borne an insult which he felt must be avenged. "Nobody suggested he suck the root. Nobody." "I don't believe he called you anything," Machin replied. "And you spoke to him first, I believe. Now move on, Sonny. I don't want to have to tell you again." "He called me a queer." "Are you worried you might be, then?" Machin asked, seeming to be honestly interested. And Garton flushed a deep, ugly red. During this exchange, Haggerty was trying with increasing desperation to pull Adrian Mellon away from the scene. Now, at last, Mellon was going. "Ta-ta, love," Adrian called cheekily over his shoulder. "Shut up, candy ass," Machin said. "Get out of here." Garton made a lunge at Mellon, and Machin grabbed him. "I can run you in, my friend," Machin said. "And the way you're acting, it might not be such a bad idea." "Next time I see you, I'm gonna hurt you," Garton bellowed after the departing pair, and heads turned to stare at him. "And if you're wearing that hat, I'm gonna kill you. This town don't need no faggots like you." Without turning, Mellon waggled the fingers of his left hand, the nails were painted cerise, and put an extra little wiggle in his walk. Garton lunged again. "One more word, or one more move, and in you go," Machin said mildly. "Trust me, my boy, for I mean exactly what I say." "Come on, Webby," Chris Unwin said uneasily. "Mellow out." "You guys like that?" Webby asked Machin, ignoring Chris and Steve completely. "Huh?" "About the bum punchers, I'm neutral," Machin said. "What I'm really in favor of is peace and quiet, and you are upsetting what I like, Pizza Face. Now, do you want to go around with me or what?" "Come on, Webby," Steve Dubé said quietly. "Let's go get some hot dogs." Webby went, straightening his shirt with exaggerated moves and brushing the hair out of his eyes. Machin, who also gave a statement on the morning following Adrian Mellon's death, said, "The last thing I heard him say as him and his buddies walked off was, 'Next time I see him, he's going to be in serious hurt.'" 6. "Please, I got to talk to my mother," Steve Dubé said for the third time. "I've got to get her to mellow out my stepfather, or there is going to be one hell of a punching match when I get home." "In a little while," Officer Charles Averino told him. Both Averino and his partner, Barney Morrison, knew that Steve Dubé would not be going home tonight, and maybe not for many nights to come. The boy did not seem to realize just how heavy this particular bust was, and Averino would not be surprised when he learned later on that Dubé had left school at age 16. At that time, he had still been in Water Street Junior High. His IQ was 68, according to the Wexler he had taken during one of his 3 trips through the 7th grade. "Tell us what happened when you saw Mellon coming out of the Falcon," Morrison invited. "No, man, I better not." "Well, why not?" Averino asked. "I already talked too much, maybe." "You came in to talk," Averino said. "Isn't that right?" "Well, yeah, but—" "Listen," Morrison said warmly, sitting down next to Dubé and shooting him a cigarette. "You think me and Chick here like fags? I don't know. Do we look like we like fags?" "No, but—" "We're your friends, Steve-O," Morrison said solemnly. "And believe me, you and Chris and Webby need all the friends you can get just about now. Because tomorrow, every bleeding heart in this town is going to be screaming for you guys' blood." Steve Dubé looked dimly alarmed. Averino, who could almost read this hairbag's pussy little mind, suspected he was thinking about his stepfather again. And although Averino had no liking for Derry's small gay community, like every other cop on the force, he would enjoy seeing the Falcon shut up forever. He would have been delighted to drive Dubé home himself. He would, in fact, have been delighted to hold Dubé's arms while Dubé's stepfather beat the creep to oatmeal. Averino did not like gays, but this did not mean he believed they should be tortured and murdered. Mellon had been savaged. When they brought him up from under the canal bridge, his eyes had been open, bulging with terror. And this guy here had absolutely no idea of what he had helped do. "We didn't mean to hurt him," Steve repeated. This was his fallback position when he became even slightly confused. "That's why you want to get out front with us," Averino said earnestly. "Get the true facts of the matter out in front, and this maybe won't amount to a piss hole in the snow. Isn't that right, Barney?" "As rain," Morrison agreed. "One more time, what do you say?" Averino coaxed. "Well," Steve said, and then slowly began to talk. 7. When the Falcon was opened in 1973, Elmer Curdy thought his clientele would consist mostly of bus riders. The terminal next door serviced 3 different lines: Trailways, Greyhound, and Aroostook County. What he failed to realize was how many of the passengers who ride buses are women or families with small children in tow. Many of the others kept their bottles in brown bags and never got off the bus at all. Those who did were usually soldiers or sailors who wanted no more than a quick beer or two. You couldn't very well go on a bender during a 10-minute rest stop. Curdy had begun to realize some of these home truths by 1977, but by then it was too late. He was up to his tits in bills, and there was no way that he could see out of the red ink. The idea of burning the place down for the insurance occurred to him, but unless he hired a professional to torch it, he supposed he would be caught. And he had no idea where professional arsonists hung out anyway. He decided in February of that year that he would give it until July 4th. If things didn't look as if they were turning around by then, he would simply walk next door, get on a Hound, and see how things looked down in Florida. But in the next 5 months, an amazing quiet sort of prosperity came to the bar, which was painted black and gold inside and decorated with stuffed birds. Elmer Curdy's brother had been an amateur taxidermist who specialized in birds, and Elmer had inherited the stuff when he died. Suddenly, instead of drawing 60 beers and pouring maybe 20 drinks a night, Elmer was drawing 80 beers and pouring 100 drinks, 120, sometimes 160. His clientele was young, polite, almost exclusively male. Many of them dressed outrageously, but those were years when outrageous dress was still almost the norm, and Elmer Curdy did not realize that his patrons were just about almost exclusively gay until 1981 or so. If Derry residents had heard him say this, they would have laughed and said that Elmer Curdy must think they had all been born yesterday. But his claim was perfectly true. Like the man with the cheating wife, he was practically the last to know. And by the time he did, he didn't care. The bar was making money, and while there were 4 other bars in Derry which turned a profit, the Falcon was the only one where rambunctious patrons did not regularly demolish the whole place. There were no women to fight over, for one thing, and these men, fags or not, seemed to have learned a secret of getting along with each other which their heterosexual counterparts did not know. Once he became aware of the sexual preference of his regulars, he seemed to hear lurid stories about the Falcon everywhere. These stories had been circulating for years, but until '81, Curdy simply hadn't heard them. The most enthusiastic tellers of these tales, he came to realize, were men who wouldn't be dragged into the Falcon with a chain fall for fear all the muscles would go out of their wrists or something. Yet they seemed privy to all sorts of information. According to the stories, you could go in there any night and see men close dancing, rubbing their cocks together right out on the dance floor. Men French kissing at the bar, men getting blowjobs in the bathrooms. There was supposedly a room out back where you went if you wanted to spend a little time on the Tower of Power. There was a big old fellow in a Nazi uniform back there who kept his arm greased most of the way to the shoulder and who would be happy to take care of you. In fact, none of these things were true. When folks with a thirst did come in from the bus station for a beer or a highball, they sensed nothing out of the ordinary in the Falcon at all. There were a lot of guys, sure, But that was no different than thousands of working men's bars all across the country. The clientele was gay, but gay was not a synonym for stupid. If they wanted a little outrageousness, they went to Portland. If they wanted a lot of outrageousness, Ramrod-style outrageousness or Peck's Big Boy-style outrageousness, they went down to New York or Boston. Derry was small. Derry was provincial, and Derry's small gay community understood the shadow under which it existed quite well. Don Haggerty had been coming into the Falcon for 2 or 3 years on the night in March of 1984 when he first showed up with Adrian Mellon. Before then, Haggerty had been the sort who plays the field, rarely showing up with the same escort half a dozen times. But by late April, it had become obvious even to Elmer Curdy, who cared very little about such things, that Haggerty and Mellon had a steady thing going. Haggerty was a draftsman with an engineering firm in Bangor. Adrian Mellon was a freelance writer who published anywhere and everywhere he could. Airline magazines, confession magazines, regional magazines, Sunday supplements, sex letter magazines. He had been working on a novel, but maybe that wasn't serious. He had been working on it since his 3rd year of college, and that had been 12 years ago. He had come to Derry to write a piece about the canal. He was on assignment from New England Byways, a glossy bi-monthly that was published in Concord. Adrian Mellon had taken the assignment because he could squeeze Byways for 3 weeks' worth of expense money, including a nice room at the Derry townhouse, and gather all the material he needed for the piece in maybe 5 days. During the other 2 weeks, he could gather enough material for maybe 4 other regional pieces. But during that 3-week period, he met Don Haggerty, and instead of going back to Portland when his 3 weeks on the cuff were over, he found himself a small apartment on Kossuth Lane. He lived there for only 6 weeks. Then he moved in with Don Haggerty. 8.